Ronald Reagan famously said in 1984, "I'm not worried about the deficit. It's big enough to take care of itself." That was back when the debt was a paltry $1.5 trillion. Kind of a funny phrase, right? Paltry $1.5 trillion. Well, during the first 2 years of the Obama presidency, it grew by more than $1.5 trillion each year. In 2008, before his own monumental spending binge commenced, President Obama used the words irresponsible and unpatriotic to describe the massive deficit spending of the Bush years. It might be about the only time I've ever agreed with that fellow. Thanks to both major political parties, the debt is now more than $18 trillion and very much taking care of itself on a trajectory that threatens the viability of the United States economy. Our speaker tonight, Mr. Jeff Utsch, aims to change that trajectory. He's the Vice President of Educational Development for Compact for America, an organization that is dedicated to helping the states ratify a balanced budget amendment. He's also a founding member of the States United Balanced Budget Initiative, an Arizona-based grassroots nonprofit dedicated to supporting the Compact for America. And by the way, if you happen to represent a foreign government, please consider diverting a little bit of your support for the Clinton Foundation to Jeff's nonprofit. Jeff is an aerospace engineer by training and currently consults with Paradynamics, a contractor working with the Defense Advanced Research Agency. He also serves as an instructor on specialized tactical swimming for the Navy SEALs. I never thought I'd meet a fellow who teaches SEALs how to swim. He's been a director and ambassador for the Navy SEAL Foundation. Jeff is a historian with a keen interest in the founding of this exceptional nation. He's a regular on a weekly constitutional radio segment in Tucson, Arizona. Jeff is also a self-taught constitutional scholar, which no doubt comes in handy in his diligent work in support of a balanced budget amendment. Please help me give a warm welcome to Mr. Jeff Utsch.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. It is truly an honor to be here. I have this on my tie because I tend to wander at times, so to keep me in line. I know Dennis Michael Lynch would have wanted to be here. And I know it caused some consternation, but it is a great opportunity for me to be here. Understand, I am here to teach, to enlist, and to convert. Okay? So, you know, a lot of times they say, when you're speaking, tell them what you're going to tell them why you're there first, right? So I'm here to teach, enlist, convert. Now, I know you may say, well, there's no conversion needed, but I want to inspire to action if I can. Now, Thomas Jefferson in 1798, after our original Bill of Rights had already been ratified and made part of our Constitution, so this is 1798, said, if I could have only one more amendment to the Constitution, I would rely upon that alone to protect our freedoms and limit the power of the federal government. And that would be an amendment to restrain the federal government from borrowing. Is that a very well-known quote? No, and I'm paraphrasing that, okay? So Thomas Jefferson is on the side of balancing a budget and restraining federal government. So you may think in your own mind, why do you think he said that? Because Thomas Jefferson understood finances, just like Hamilton did. They were on opposite ends at times. But he understood with the power of the purse came power, didn't it? And then Ronald Reagan in 1994 wrote a letter to a man I met in July at the Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, Lou Euler. And I'm going to paraphrase this letter. It said, Lou, the federal government is never going to restrain itself. It's a good thing that the founders gave us Article 5 of the Constitution that gives the states the power to make this happen. So we need to get out there, Ronald Reagan is saying to Lou, and have the states make this happen. So I teach that because we kind of have the bookends there, don't we? From Thomas Jefferson to Ronald Reagan, and understanding that the federal government is not going to restrain itself. Now, there are many, and we're going to talk about this during tonight, who are, in the conservative side, a little worried about a federal convention. Is that right? Some people are about a runaway, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Because what we have here is a way to resolve some of those concerns. Now, I want you to know up front, I would be for a general convention of the states, okay? But I do understand the questions that were asked, because Madison had those same questions, okay? Madison had those same questions. But as you study the founders and the Constitution, there is not one that said, don't do it. They had their questions about an Article 5, but there is not one in all my research that said, don't do it. Now, what the compact does is address some of those questions that we might have of who are the delegates, some of the worries that we might have, how long would it last, what it's going to be about. And a compact is just another word for a contract amongst sovereigns. The Constitution itself is a compact. Today, each state in the Union is a party to at least 20 compacts today. And so this is nothing unusual, but it is something that will help with the safety, certainty, and speed of a convention. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through tonight, okay? So I'm going to tell a few stories about me first so you know a little bit about my background. I was born in Washington, D.C., the den of iniquity itself, and raised just outside of Richmond, Virginia. Okay, now in the early 70s, being raised outside of Richmond, Virginia, when you were kids raised in the West, those of you who were, you played a lot of cowboys and Indians, right? Well, in Richmond, Virginia, or Midlothian, just outside of Richmond, you know, Mosby's Raiders that's where they were from. We didn't play cowboys and Indians. What do you think we played? Rebels against the Yankees. Okay? And coming out of Richmond, Virginia, as a boy, at that period of time, we did not want to wear the Yankee blue. We were wearing the butternut gray. Now, guess where my mom was from? Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Okay? So when I'd go up and visit my cousins in the summer, they would say, it's a good thing we beat you rebels back then. And I was like, that's not what I'm hearing where I come from. So at a very young age, and I really mean 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, I'm thinking, boy, there must be two sides of this story. Because I didn't understand it, but I said, I want to understand it. So I had my mom read me the West Point story. And that's a book written a long time ago about generals that graduated from West Point that fought on both sides of that war, right? And if you want to understand the Civil War, where do you have to go? Back. And searching West Point and that history, yes, but you go to the antebellum period, 1850 and up, and you study about the Compromise of 1850 and the Lincoln-Douglas debates and the Kansas-Nebraska and the bloody Kansas and all these things leading up to them. And if you want to understand that period, where do you have to go? Back again. And you keep going back, and it took me back to the founding era. And so I spent a lot of time as a kid reading about our founding. Now, being in Richmond, Virginia, there's a lot of history around there, isn't there? Okay, just up the road is St. John's Church. When I go back to do my Navy training, and I do it probably 10 times a year, I usually stop by St. John's Church on the way to my house. My brother still lives there. And to me, it's a spiritual experience because, of course, that's where Patrick Henry gave his, who knows what he gave there, his liberty or death speech. And that's where Thomas Jefferson was galvanized to the cause. Not to say he wasn't already there. And Thomas Jefferson, of course, said, Patrick Henry was the greatest orator of the ages. Guess who didn't like Patrick Henry as a person, though? Thomas Jefferson did not. Hated him. But he recognized his genius there. So anyway, that's my childhood story. So since the age of About 15. I've read about an hour a day on the founding of this country, our Constitution, and with no special degree. So I don't have anything, any letters behind my name except for a lot of reading. And I like to read the original documents themselves, and then how things have changed since then, and by writers at each stage. But anyway, I always wanted to take my children back to Gettysburg for the sesquicentennial celebration of that battle, which happened when? 2013. Okay, just a year and a half ago. So I have 4 kids, I'm married, and we decided to make this pilgrimage. Now my cousins still live there, and we always have fun going back. But my cousin Jay was the guy who helped out, because it's on the farm right next to the farm my mom was raised on, where they had the reenactment. So it was kind of fun having a reenactment stage. But I took the kids back, and the goal was this. I wanted to teach them what is it to be an American. And this is part of what I started with in understanding about a runaway convention, because I first think we need to understand what it is to be an American. Define it. Now that should be a simple thing, isn't it? It should be simple, but is it hard? It's like I teach a whole seminar on what does freedom mean. Because everybody says they're for it, right? What does it mean? Okay, what does it mean to be an American? I wanted to teach my children. Not that we don't talk about this all the time at the dinner table anyway, right? We talk about this. We always have a lesson of the evening, whatever it is, even something short. So I took them back. We flew into Richmond. We drove down to Jamestown. We drove down to Cape Henry, where the first landing is. We drove up to Yorktown. Everybody picturing this? Drove back up to Richmond for the Battle of the Crater in Petersburg. Then the battlefields around Richmond. And then we went up to Fort McHenry. Then we went up to Philadelphia, Valley Forge, New York. Yes, there were Revolutionary War battles there now. It's hard to visualize, but it happened. And down to Gettysburg. And at each stop on the tour, this is what I asked my children. Valley Forge. Were the people here more concerned about their freedoms and the opportunities it gave them, and were they willing to pay the sacrifice for that, for themselves and their posterity, or was safety, security, comfort, convenience, and lifestyle paramount? At Fort McHenry, at Yorktown, at the Philadelphia State House, I asked the same question. Jamestown. Was their freedom and the opportunities it gave them more important, even though it caused much consternation, distress, and sacrifice? More important to them than what? Safety. Their immediate fear of catching a bullet, or fighting an Indian, or dying of disease, or cold, or anything else. Security. Long-term security. Pensions. Whatever else it may be. Comfort. They weren't very comfortable out there at Valley Forge, were they? Convenience. You know, I'm sure a lot of the women waiting for their men at Valley Forge would rather have them home helping out. And lifestyle. We need to think about that today. I truly believe that is what it means to be an American. Historically, I think that's what it is. And look into our own, in the mirror, and understand, is that my belief also? And would I be willing to do what it takes to maintain our freedoms and opportunities? Okay, I'm going to then now talk about, so keep that in mind of what I taught my children. On 9/11, 2001, I happened to be with that SEAL team who eventually got the bad guy. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about? Okay? I am not a SEAL. I want to make that very clear. I don't want anybody saying, hey, Jeff said he was a SEAL in this. I've trained the SEALs for over 20 years now in a very small particular part of their training, and I'm honored to do so. And I get to be among some of the greatest men we have. When 9/11 happened, some beepers went off. Some people came into where we were training and told everybody what was going on. Everybody was like, they knew it was game on, right? They knew it was game on at that time. Guess who was going down range in that group? Everybody but me. I had a very hard time, and I know I don't want any pity party, but at the time I was throwing one for myself. Okay? Because I didn't feel like I had put myself in a position to make a difference. I felt like I had let myself down and the other people that I was working with down. And so the following year, as a couple of my friends got killed in Afghanistan, I had a talk with a friend of mine, Jimmy, who was back from deployment. And I sat down with him and I said, Jimmy, what can I do? How can I help? What can we do to support you? And he said two things. He said, number one, if I buy the farm, take care of my family. I was like, okay, how am I going to do that? Okay. He said, you asked, right? I asked. Okay. Number two, he thought about for a while. He only said two things. And he looked at me and he said, Jeff, really? Do your best. Do your best. Now, at the time, I was like, what does he mean by that? But he got it, didn't he? He gets it. What's having our freedom all about? Having the opportunity to reach our potential, right? And I got it. Anybody ever seen the end of Saving Private Ryan? Where he said, earn it? It's kind of like the same thing. But I don't think he was thinking about this. This came from his heart. This came from his heart on what he wanted us to do. So I started thinking, okay, how am I going to make a difference here at home while he's doing this abroad? So the first thing I did was found out there was a Navy SEAL Foundation and helped those guys the best I could and raised money and had a dinner in Tucson and these kind of things. But the second thing is I recognize we need to maintain our freedoms at home, don't we? Or else what are they fighting for over there? We need to do our part. So I'm going to go back now to Lincoln a little bit. A year and a half before I went up to Gettysburg, I spent not the whole time, but every day I read everything I could find on Lincoln that he wrote or talked about, spoke about. And what did he speak a lot about? Well, he spoke a lot about slavery. Okay, and he also spoke a ton of other things too. But what he did is try to make slavery a moral issue, not a political issue. If you read the Lincoln-Douglas debates, there was a lot of debates, and Douglas said, look, it's not a moral issue. It's just yes or no. We shouldn't care. It's up or down. And what did Lincoln say? No. These are people. These are people that we should be caring about, and it's a moral, not a political question. Okay, so I want to go back and talk about what is Lincoln's definition of slavery. Is this still on? Yeah. What is his definition of slavery? So in reading all his works, and it took me a long time to do it, it is the principle of you work, I eat. You work, I eat. Okay, now I'm going to take all his writings and have a little longer definition of slavery. And he didn't say this exactly, but if you put all of his writings together about it, he says this. When one man consistently eats the bread of another man's labor without his consent. Okay, let's do that again. Everybody got this? Definition of slavery, not that he said this exactly, but I'm giving you my opinion after reading every single work I could find on him, starting with his Lyceum speech in 1838, when he was a representative in the state of Illinois. When one man consistently eats the bread of another man's labor without his consent. Everybody got that? Now, if you were in a state of servitude or slavery, do you have your freedom? No, you do not. Do you think you can reach your potential? No, you can't. Do you think you can do your best? No, you can't. You might be able to do your best within that confines of that, right? You can still do your best there, but you won't reach the potential if you would have had your freedoms. You understand? So when I heard Jimmy tell, do your best, without our freedoms, how are we going to do our best? And so in thinking about this, I said, look, in listening to people on talk shows, radio shows, and other things, I decided, you know, Jeff, you know that. You know, when Adams went to the first Continental Congress, he was very intimidated because of the other VIPs that showed up from Virginia and New York. And he was like, holy moly, here's all the people I've read about and have done all these great things. But then when he heard them speaking, he was thinking, hey, I know that. I read that. Hey, that guy's actually quoting me. And so all of a sudden, John Adams had a voice, didn't he? And we know, during the debates on should we become independent or not, he was probably the most forceful spokesman on independence, wasn't he? And when I heard this, I said, look, I know that. No, he's not quoting that person right. In context, it means this. And I said, it's time for me to start going out there and teaching. So I started a constitutional discussion group many years ago, and we've kind of grown that since then. But ever since I was 17, I recognized that the balance of power was off between the states and the federal government. Now, when I was 17, guess who was president at the time? This is a good guess here. What's that? Reagan is right. Okay, and this is easy to remember because when I was 17, I was reading the 17th Federalist paper, Mr. Dugan's class in government. And in the 17th, and I'll paraphrase this for you, and I'll read it. And Hamilton is making an argument to the Anti-Federalists. He's answering their questions, right? And he's saying, Anti-Federalists, don't worry. Even the most ardent tyrant is going to be satiated with the power to make war, appoint ambassadors, coin money, borrow money, and he listed the powers delegated to the federal government. They are never going to want to get involved in our domestic affairs, such as agriculture, land use, education. This is even 30 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. And what was I thinking at the time? The balance has shifted a little bit. So what did the founders give us as a solution if that happened? The same Hamilton wrote in the 85th Federalist Papers, and I'm paraphrasing again, the following. Look, Anti-Federalists, even if you're right. Now, some Anti-Federalist names that you might recognize. And these guys are not idiots. They're part of the founding generation. Patrick Henry, a guy worth listening to. Greatest orator of the ages, according to Jefferson, right? Richard Henry Lee, George Mason, Governor Clinton of New York, Melancton Smith of New York, and the list goes on, including our future President Monroe. So do you think some of their writings are worth reading as well? And where they thought the federal government could take advantage of us. But during that time period, Hamilton says in The Last Federalist, look guys, even if you're right, Anti-Federalists, and there's a runaway federal government, we've given you Article 5 to rein the federal government in. Now you can go down the list. George Washington quotes, George Nicholas at the Virginia ratification debates, Hamilton, Madison, Jefferson, all the way down are saying, look, the argument was, and there were other arguments there too, right? But he ended Article 5. So is it something that we ought to pay attention to? I think it is something that we ought to pay attention to. So in looking at Article 5, the arguments for is this is what the founders intended. I got a quick story. When I was a kid, 8 years old, and I was raised in a bricked-over hunting cabin on the James River. Originally at an outhouse when we were little, and we got indoor stuff going. And we had 5 acres of grass or more in the front yard. Now, as an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid pushing a lawnmower on 5 acres, how long does that take to mow? In the middle of a Virginia summer. Mosquitoes, all that stuff. It's not like California weather, believe me. Okay? Humid and all this kind of stuff. So I'm pushing the lawnmower out there. 10, 11 years old, my dad buys a riding lawnmower. The prized possession of our family. And it's not cheap, right? Those of you who've ever owned a riding lawnmower, they cost money. And so, as an 11-year-old boy with Dad's prized new riding lawnmower, what did he do? He read me the riot act. Look, you can do the riding lawnmower, but if you break this thing, it's coming out of your hide. Okay? And getting the belt back then was not politically incorrect like it is today. Okay? And so, as a young man, I was too scared to use that riding lawnmower at first. So the next time I was out there pushing 5 acres, and I can tell you this, it takes long enough to mow 5 acres with a push lawnmower. By the time you're done, guess what's happening? The grass over here started growing again. So I come in one Saturday and say, hey, Dad, you know, I'm just sweating and dying. And I say, this is just ridiculous. And what do you think he said to me? Son, are you stupid? Okay? Have I raised you right? Use the tools I've given you to accomplish the task at hand. And that's what he said. And I said, but Dad, I'm scared. He goes, look, let me take you by the hand. I'm going to take you out there, and we're going to go through this again. And I have confidence in you that you can do this. Now that helped me, didn't it? It alleviated some fears. And I got on the riding lawnmower, and guess what? Okay? I did it. Now there was a couple times I fell asleep at the wheel and almost ended up in the James River. That's true. And boy, man, I would have been in big trouble if that would have happened. I truly believe if we were to go to our founders today and ask them, we've got this problem, and we've got this problem, and we've got this problem, and we've got this problem. What do you think they would say? Have you used the tools we've given you? What are you guys whining about? Take it back. That's what we told you to do. You're scared? Okay, you know what Jefferson said? Fear. It's not an American trait. That's pretty cool, isn't it? There are no guarantees. Were there guarantees at Lexington and Concord? Sorry, I'm not going to sign up unless I know I'm going to have my safety, security, comfort, convenience, and lifestyle. Sorry, I'm not going to risk this if we don't have the wood and everything at Valley Forge. Jefferson, fear is not an American trait. So what we have done with Article 5 and the compact is the following. We have taken the concerns of who are the delegates going to be? How long is the convention going to last? What's it going to be about? On and on and on down the list. There's like 22 or 23 issues in the compact addressed. And they are addressed ahead of time. So the states can look at the contract that they are agreeing to and saying, okay, the governor is going to be the delegate. It's going to last 24 hours only. It's going to be about a balanced budget amendment only. and the states can come together. It takes 34, 2/3 of the states to call a convention, and in Article 5 it says Congress shall call a convention upon the request of 2/3 of the states. And an amendment shall become an amendment with 3/4 of the states ratifying it, or 38. The compact, the way that works, and again, the compact is an agreement among sovereigns. The compact works only if 38 states decide to ratify it. So we wouldn't even call a convention a single convention unless 38 states. So the convention would be held. It is pretty much pre-ratified. At the time we speak right now, Representative Paul Gosar from Arizona is introducing a resolution into Washington, D.C. to approve the Compact for America and the rules and regulations it set forth. There are many that fear that Congress will take away the power from the states. The resolution in Congress already settles that, and all we need is a majority of vote in both houses, not a supermajority vote. So the compact is a vehicle, and we want to teach that this can be used from the states. If we are successful in a balanced budget effort, it could also be used in other issues, such as term limits or other things that we want to do. But it's time to teach our states and our state legislators and the people of the states the powers that they have. When I go around to talk to people, there are many who feel disenfranchised. Like, what's the use? I'm not going to make a difference because it doesn't matter. Washington has taken it all away, and I'm not going to change things. When you understand that things can happen through local municipalities and the states, then people become more enfranchised and feel like they can make a difference. And this is what our founders wanted us to feel. So the compact is the vehicle. The balanced budget amendment is the payload. Now, when we get to the Q&A part, I'll get a little bit more into the balanced budget. Now, here's the thing. We are headed in a direction. We're headed in a direction right now that we cannot maintain. Okay? Let me do this analogy here. Thomas Paine said this. Thomas Paine was a great writer. If you have not read Common Sense, The Crisis, and the Rights of Man, beautiful. Because even though they're written hundreds of years ago, he writes to the common man. And they're beautiful things. And he says this about the revolution. He says, look, is it reasonable that an island will rule a continent forever? Doesn't make sense, does it? Okay, now think about this reasoning. So his point was this. If an island is not going to rule a continent, we know it's going to happen. So man up, woman up. Are we going to leave it to our children to do? And he called people out on the carpet right there. Similarly, we know that the path that we're on in spending cannot continue. Do we? I think that's just, it can't happen. There are consequences to this. So I would call us out like Thomas Paine called out the colonists at the time. Are we going to leave it to our children? Are we so concerned about our safety, security, comfort, convenience, and lifestyle, which is the antithesis of what I believe being an American is, that we are too afraid to handle the task of the day, which is every bit as hard, I believe, as what Thomas Paine was going through. But the choice is this. Either we are going to decide where we're going to land this fiscal plane and try to pick out a meadow of our choosing, or what's going to happen? The engine's going to stop at some point, and we just hope it's not in the middle of the Himalayas. Now, one more story, and I'll talk about some questions here. Back in 2011, there was a tragedy that many of you might have heard of with some of our SEAL teams, one in particular, where a helicopter went down. Extortion 17. I had a lot of friends on that helicopter. So I went back to the memorial service. Very emotional. Tough time. A lot of people hurting. Widows, children. And I think part of what makes me passionate and continuously fired up is I get to peek under those covers every so often and see the sacrifices that many are doing on our behalf. And I got to tell you, every time I go out, I come back changed. Because there's another story that nobody knows about. I have a friend who runs some training in Coronado. He's got his shirt off running with some of these young bucks trying to become SEALs. And the guy behind him comes up and says, "Master Chief, I think you've got skin cancer. What are those blotches on your back?" Bullet holes. We have no idea the sacrifice these people are making and the load that they carry daily for us. When I went to this funeral, there was the big one, and then there was a private service. And somehow I was able to get in. I felt like somebody who shouldn't have been there, but I was. And the commanding officer of this team that lost that entire helicopter said this to the men in the room, and it was a small room, a quarter of the size of this. He said, after telling them a lot of other things. I try not to get emotional with these things. Sometimes I remember this stuff. Every one of you in here whose names are not on the wall outside has something more to give. These guys have been fighting for 10 years already. Eyes missing, limbs, scars, divorces, hadn't seen their kids. And what does he say? Every one of you in this room whose name is not on that wall has more to give. What do you think about that? So I want you to sink in. My message to you tonight is everybody in this room, because you're here, as much as you've done, collectively, individually, has what? More to give. More to give. So I am all about freedom, liberty. You know, Patrick Henry said during the ratification debates, and by the way, Madison said, "No Constitution, no United States of America." No Constitution, no United States of America. But Patrick Henry, and he also said, look, as good as the Constitutional Convention itself was, and I took the notes on it, Madison saying, it was just a lifeless piece of paper. What breathed life into it were the ratification debates. Where do you think I spend a lot of my time? Studying the ratification debates. Patrick Henry got up and chastised everybody in the room on his speech June 5th, 1788. He said, "I hear a lot about becoming more powerful among nations, how much our trade is going to improve, how much all these things. Where's the spirit of 76 in any of you?" he says. "I may be old-fashioned, but I remember when liberty was the call word. That was our banner to look to." Now, he does all this without notes. He's an impressive guy. When I read Patrick Henry, I get chills every time. So I want to go back. The greatest way that we are going to get our liberty back, it is not the only way. That's not what I said. The greatest way is by imposing spending limits on our federal government. Using the tools founders gave us, trying to alleviate as many concerns as possible, but understanding that as Americans, we value our freedom and opportunity more than those other things. And we understand what Jefferson said, fear is not an American trait. So what I'd ask you to do, because I do have a couple things, real quick in conclusion. Our federal government is out of control with spending and their powers. Founders gave us tools to rein them in. As Americans, we value our freedoms. We owe it to our forefathers and those who sacrifice for us now. The BBA and the Compact is a great start in doing that. And as Reagan said, the federal government will not do it. The states must. So I have a couple action items here, and then we'll get into the Q&A. First of all, you've all got some sheets down here. And I'm not going to go through all these, but I did want you to look at skyrocketing federal debt considered the biggest threat to our national security. Now, Netanyahu said some other things also, and I would agree with him too. Okay? But this is a serious threat to our national security. The Compact for America, the progress we've made, we have endorsements from George Will, Alan West, Grover Norquist, Judge Napolitano on Fox News, and the list keeps growing because they recognize the way that this balanced budget is put together not only has teeth, but it makes the states become back in charge. So we've got kind of an update. Today in Mississippi, we just passed it through the House and the Senate today. The Compact Coalition has formed with Georgia and Alaska being number 1. It looks like Mississippi is going to be number 3. I mean, number 1 and number 2. Number 3. We're in South Dakota. I think that will pass this year. We're in Wyoming, Arkansas, and a myriad of other states right now. So this kind of gives you what we're doing here. And then there's one sheet that says Compact for a Balanced Budget, Summary of Key Legislative Provisions. That gives you kind of an overview of what the balanced budget does. And the actual wording of the amendment is on the back of that page. Now I've got a couple action items for you tonight. Number 1, if anybody can help me or the Compact for America team get in front of similar groups or individuals to spread the message about this and other things. I give talks and lectures on other things, but I'm focusing on this right now because of how important it is. Number 2, there's a donation slip in there. We have done a lot of work on the limited amount of budget that we've got. But it does take people's time, travel, and everything that we're doing, and we're going to get in all 50 states. This year we're in about 15. So any donation made is well received and appreciated. And if you can spread the word and get us in front of other donors or like-minded people, it's great. Number 3, spread the word yourself and teach. So it doesn't take us getting in front of groups, right? Spread it to your family, friends, and whoever you want. And then number 4 would be support, and you can absolutely do this from California, support Congressman Paul Gosar on his efforts to pass that resolution in Congress. Talk to your local congressman. This should not be a partisan issue, should it? We will win the fight by doing what Lincoln did with the slavery debate. This is a moral, not a political issue. It's doing the right thing. I don't want to let my friend Jimmy down. I want to do the best I can and help to provide that opportunity for my family. And listen, I really appreciate your involvement. Just that you're here tonight shows that you care about our country and that you want to do what's right. And we need to become citizen SEALs to do as much internally as they do externally that we don't even know about. But I'm guaranteeing you they're on 24/7, and so should we be. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right, just a reminder that our ushers are going to be walking the aisles here with index cards. If you could write your questions legibly and hand them over to an usher, and they'll bring it over here.
And let me mention real quick before the first question, I think the website is on some of those handouts, but compactforamerica.org, there's a lot of information on there also. Okay.
All right, and while our ushers are gathering up questions, I've got a couple to start us off. So you mentioned the 3 states that have already passed this legislation. Can you talk about the progress in the other 47 and particularly in the other 35 that you're going to need to get there?
Absolutely. Well, you know, I was in a meeting with Grover Norquist a few weeks ago, and what a turnaround the states have had. As a matter of fact, in West Virginia, there's a bumper sticker going around on the cars saying, 83 years is enough. Now, apparently, there was somebody's mom that was turning 83, and she thought the Obamacare stuff was in, you know, the death panels weren't being imposed, and it was a bumper sticker about 83 is enough. That is not what happened. The legislature in West Virginia, for the first time in 83 years, went from Democrat over to a Republican side. And again, this should not be a partisan issue. However, we are finding right now more support in the conservative states. And right now, there are 24 states that are red from the governor and both houses. There's only 8 states that are blue right now from the governor and both houses. So we need to rush, and that's a pretty good improvement, isn't it? We need to make sure that we use this opportunity, and that's why it's so important to get the word out right now. So we've got a long ways to go. We're in about 12 to 15 this year, but we need to get a lot more. Having said that, about 90% of the people I talk to or more, once they become educated on what we're doing, are what I said at the beginning, converts, enlisted and wanting to help.
There are several other groups working towards a balanced budget amendment. In fact, I think just yesterday I got a mailer from, I think somebody calling themselves Tea Party Express, advocating for it. Are you coordinating, cooperating? Are these efforts complementary in any way, or is everybody just kind of working independently?
That's a good question. It would be better if there was more of a coordinated effort. However, right now, like with Convention of the States and Compact for America, I kind of look at this as different branches of the military. You know, the Compact is set up for speed and getting things done with a single issue. Okay? So I'd compare that to the Marines going in and taking a beachhead. But if you want to hold it long term, you send the Army behind, right? And kind of move in with more troops. So I think some people have their preferences of one or the other, but both have their role, I believe. But what we want to do is at least be successful on one, and I believe that's going to be the Compact first, because we're resolving the issues some conservatives have, and also with the ease of being able to have all the states having the same verbiage. The problem is, with some other efforts, is that the states, when they're calling like for a balanced budget amendment, there's been some emails going around saying, hey, we have 30 states, and we're almost to 34. Well, if you read the calls of those states, I mean, read them, and I have. Not all of them are different. I think maybe 6 are the same in one, and we'll support a balanced budget amendment if it does this. Does everybody see the problem there? So when Congress gets that, then all of a sudden some of those fears we're worried about could become reality, because then Congress gets to call the shots on how that's going to be called and what the rules are. Now, I'd still be for it, believe me, any type of communication amongst the states, deciding how we're going to work together is important. And we can learn from history, just like our Massachusetts, Virginia, the old colonies that became states, set up a committee of correspondence. Why did they do that? There was smoke, but there was no fire yet, but they were like, you know what? We better start talking to each other. And if something happens up here, you come to us. And if something happens down there, we'll come to you. What should the states be doing? We should be talking. If one state gets picked on, you're not being able to drill in Anwar or do this, that, and the other, or one state is getting picked on and taking lands taken away and this, what should the other states be doing? You can't do that unless you're talking. The compact starts that coalition amongst the states by having that commission, state commission. Long answer, sorry.
All right, so you may have already touched on this a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm reading the questions at the same time you're answering. You talked a little bit about how this is different from the Convention of the States, but what are the checks that keep it from becoming a runaway convention?
Okay. First of all, let me step back and educate a little bit because I love to teach. If I get an opportunity, I'll take it. Okay, the first thing that we learn is many of us were taught that the first convention was a runaway convention. Not true. That has been very hard to reteach. If you read the calls of the individual states that delegated their delegates to go to the Constitutional Convention, 10 of the 12 that showed up gave them all powers to do whatever they needed to do in order to make this work. There were only 2 states that did not. One of them was New York. That's why most of the delegates from New York skedaddled and said, we don't have authority to do this. The other one I can't remember right now, but most of those guys skedaddled too. Okay? But after that process, it had to go back to Congress, recommended to the states, ratified by the states, at least 9, and then kicked back. Does everybody get that? We were not founded on a runaway convention. So in this, we have to understand this is not a constitutional convention. This is a convention to ratify an individual amendment. By contract set up prior to the convention itself. In the compact and resolution to Congress, it says if a delegate exceeds his power or mandate or hers, that they are disqualified. Okay? Whatever they're trying to propose outside of that, done, legally off. Okay? So that's one of the safety nets, amongst many.
Are you prepared with strong, succinct messaging to counteract the inevitable effort of the Democrats to turn this partisan? And I would add to this question also the media.
Well, I'd like to say yes, but who is ever prepared for all that? Okay. I like the saying, do what is right, let the consequence follow. Okay? But we have to do it in a smart way. And that is why I think taking the message from a political to a moral issue, you know, because what do many say? It's about the children. You know, we've got to save this, or we got to do this. Well, guess what, guys? This is about the children. And it's also about the preservation of our republic and giving opportunity and freedom for generations to come. It is our time now to step up. So if the messaging is right and people are listening, the problem is, as back in the Revolutionary War, you had the patriots and the what? Tories or loyalists. Most of those who were colonists who decided they were loyalists were who? People who benefited from the relationship with Britain. Tax collectors, you see where I'm going with this? Okay, we can make that same comparison here, right? But the colonists said, look, you're not loyalists. That's too good of a name. So they recoined it and said, you are an enemy to liberty. So they changed the verbiage, didn't they, in the semantics. You're not a loyalist, you're an enemy to liberty. So those are the kind of things that we're going to have to talk about to simplify the message and call out the truth.
So to expand on that point a bit, can you talk about how deficits and the debt threaten our liberty?
Yes. Well, the deficits and the debt limit our liberty because taxes, time is what our freedom is about, right? How much time we have in a day. So the more time we spend paying for that debt, the more time we're not working to further our own cause. Now let me tell you, Jefferson, if you've ever read British Rights of Colonial America, he said to Britain, we conquered this land. We're the ones growing the plants. We're creating the wealth. We're doing it for us, the individual. Okay? What have we heard on the other side? And Britain was saying, you didn't do that. That's what Britain was saying. Britain was saying, we provided the redcoats. We're giving you ships to transport your stuff. Do you guys see this? Any correlation there?
You didn't build that.
Okay. Sorry, did I answer the question?
I think so. Your definition of slavery seems to also describe the spread the wealth philosophy. What can be done by the citizenry to eliminate the share the wealth tax system we now have in the United States?
Okay, well, let me answer that question. I love to study history. You guys get that? I love to read this stuff if I could do it all the time. In each era of our nation's history, we have had the great questions of the era. The first great question was, are we going to split off with the mother country? The second great question was, how are we going to govern ourselves? Then it was going to be, how are we going to deal with each other? And then we had the slavery issue, right? Industrialization period. How are we going to deal with the world? The greatest question of this era, our founders already understood. And we are rediscovering it. How come that we can stand on the shoulders of Newton and Einstein and learn from them and everybody's okay with it? But when it comes to natural law, we always seem to go like this. So the most critical question of our era and what we have to do to teach is what is the proper role of government? Okay? We have to rediscover. The Federalists and Anti-Federalists did not argue about that. They understood the proper role of government, and if you want a real quick treatise in what the proper role of government is, of course the second paragraph in the Declaration of Independence is good, but also Madison's essay on property is awesome. It's only a 15-minute read. And they all agreed by that, but they disagreed on how to implement it. To protect your freedoms and your property. We have gone to the other side to fulfill your wants and needs. And there's that whole string over here. Now, if we told the founders where we were today, they would laugh. And they would say, what have you done with your inheritance? So we need to teach that.
Given the extent to which the current government ignores or eviscerates the amendments and the rights already on the books, any thoughts on how we would keep them from ignoring the restrictions that would be imposed by this balanced budget amendment? Absolutely.
Look, we have to use every tool in the shed before we do anything else. There's no justification for doing anything until we use all the tools in the shed. There is a natural law that one loves that which one sacrifices for. It is why many of our military members have a special love for our country. It is why we love our children so much. It is a natural law. If the people in this country get together and demand that we have a federal balanced budget amendment, and we sacrifice for that and make it happen, and the federal government does not do it, then there will be revolution. And I believe they will, because they will understand that we are fed up and we're serious about this. The problem is, as Washington said in a letter to Lafayette moons ago, and he was very seldom open with anybody. He said, "It is a shame in our form of government that the people must feel before they see." What I am trying to do is shed that spotlight a little bit further down the tracks, because we're going to be feeling this one, aren't we? Okay, I'm sorry I'm answering these kind of long, but...
Given that all economic movement since the 18th century has been towards government expansion, isn't there a great risk that our original Constitution will be modified in a more progressive direction?
There is always a risk of that happening. However, understand, when you go through an amendment ratification process, it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Right now, 8 all blue states, 24 red states. North Carolina equals California. North Dakota equals New York. We have much more weight on the side of originalists and what the founders wanted and the proper role of government being where it should be than on the other side. And I don't think we should be too fearful of that happening. And if they try to take away the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, remember, even at the convention, if it's a runaway, it still has to go through the states to be ratified.
All right, I've got a couple of questions about the money supply that I'm going to try and ask both at the same time, and you can answer them both. How does the Federal Reserve and the printing of money relate to this? And how would a balanced budget amendment or a balanced budget affect the U.S. money supply, given that our fiat-based currency is tied to the national debt?
Okay, that's a tough one. Okay. This is not changing the money system or Federal Reserve. I have my own opinions about all that. But what it does do is cap the debt, the total debt, to 105% of whatever the debt is at the time of its ratification. So let's say it's $20 trillion. So the total debt would be capped at what? $21 trillion. So it would give us a time to land the plane gently, right? And try to do that. But the reason that we're recommending, and the reason we have the endorsements of many of these nationally renowned conservatives, is because of the way that this is written right here. If you do a balanced budget on gross national product or population or wealth, the way those amendments are written have to be very long, like 9 or 10 pages. And even then they could be gamed. We know this because they changed the definition of the GNP just last year, did they not? Okay? This way it's, hey, whatever comes in is what you have. And you have a small credit line. And what's in this balanced budget also is very important. It has the states become a board of directors. Because it doesn't mean you can't exceed the debt limit. But if the federal government wants to, it's got to get a majority of the vote of the state legislatures. 26 of the 50. So if we're in a time of emergency or war, or we need to do this, and people feel like this is something we need to do, guess what? It can happen. Okay? But the states are that board of directors that regulates that.
How would unfunded liabilities enter into the equation?
Something that's really important to understand when our national politicians get up and say, we've got to raise the debt limit or we're going to be in default. Okay? Now, you have to understand, and the 14th Amendment, Section 4, defines debt of the United States. In the first draft of the 14th Amendment, it said obligations will be paid. Now remember, the 14th Amendment was one of the Civil War amendments. And the country wanted to make sure that all the debts were paid, incurred by the Union side. Okay? The first draft said obligations, but it crossed that out and then went to debt. Now there's a big difference. Okay? Today, obligations are unfunded liabilities and entitlements. One Congress cannot bind a future Congress unless it is by amendment. So any pensions, Social Security, now as much as we may want or not to want to hear this, this is constitutional, okay? That those unfunded liabilities can and could be cut, entitlements. What cannot be defaulted on is the approved national debt that has to be paid. So whatever debt we've incurred, so in other words, as soon as we paid it out, we can't go back and say, no, we're not going to pay you back, on those bonds or whatever we borrowed, okay? So the misnomer is, we've got to raise the debt limit or we'll go in default. Well, that's not true. There's hard choices that can be made so that we would be able to stick to where we were.
So you used the metaphor of an airplane potentially crashing either in a meadow or in the Himalayas. This questioner asked, what if the crash happens? In your opinion, what's next?
Well, here's the historical fact, is that the other countries that have had fiscal problems have always had big brothers around them one way or the other. In other words, their economies were not big enough to sink the entire world economy, okay? If you look at Greece, I mean, it's hurt, right? Venezuela, these types of things. But it is going to be uncharted and unprecedented territory with the United States. These are things that are unknown, that I am not, the one thing I've learned about when I train the SEALs is I talk about what I know. And I don't pretend to know what I don't, because they will call you out right there. I learned that a long time ago with those guys. So I have no idea, but I know it's not good.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. So first one of the two is actually a couple questions combined. People are asking about various folks with megaphones like Mark Levin or Donald Trump or, I don't know, name your presidential candidate. Are you getting those people on your side? What are you doing to go about that?
Yes, I mean, I'm just a little guy. Nobody knows who I am. I'm sure everybody was bummed when they didn't have Dennis Michael Lynch here tonight. But I want to get the word out and teach, because I study these things every day, and I've done it for 35 years. And so I want to get in front of like a Mark Levin. As a matter of fact, I've been preaching Article 5 since 1985. Everybody looked at me like I had a third eyeball until Mark Levin's book came out. And then all of a sudden, hey Jeff, weren't you talking about this? Yeah, I'm glad you noticed. Okay? Now the thing with Mark, though, is I want to teach him, because he's kind of down on these single amendment conventions, because he's saying, look, oh, you think you can do this and do everything. No, we don't. It's just, let's get a touchdown. Let's get a field goal. Let's start this where we can. And we understand with the polling that 70% of the American people are in general understand about balancing their books and understand there are consequences eventually if you can't. So I'm not saying a balanced budget amendment is going to do it. What I'm out there teaching, all of it, but I think it will be the biggest single amendment that we can do. I agree with Jefferson. That will get the camel's nose in the tent. The states will feel empowered. The people will feel empowered, and we'll start to take it back. Understand, one thing we just do not understand in this country. The states are the parent. The federal government is the offspring. Something's happened. The young teenager has gotten unruly. It's time to put that leash on a little tight.
All right, the one last question.
Yes, sir.
Can you reiterate for us the one or two things you'd like the people in this room to go out and do after this talk?
I would love to do that. And let me just review here real quick. So we've got action items. Number one is help me or the Compact for America team get in front of other groups or people that you think could help either spread the word, get us in front of the Mark Levins, get us on these shows, O'Reilly, whatever. We want to spread the word. There is nothing wrong with preaching the truth. Nothing wrong with it, and I'm not afraid to do it. So that's number one. Number two, you know, it's always the ask. If we can get in front of some people that have an ability to donate funds so we can make this happen, that is a big help. Number three, teach it yourself. Alleviate the concerns of a runaway convention. Teach what it is to be an American. Fear is not an American trait. Now, we all have fear, and I understand that. But what was Jefferson trying to teach? We're going to move forward. We're not going to worry about what England's doing and how they're threatening us, or France, or these kind of things. We're going to go move forward. And four, to support Paul Gosar's resolution in Congress. Support him, send an email, work on that. So I hope that answers your question. If you do want to donate, a couple things, you can just give me your little form tonight or call me. I have cards in the back. I want to make sure my contact information is out there. I do have cards in the back there, and I have some in my pocket. And so I want to make myself available. And I really appreciate your time tonight listening.
Thank you.